This will contain many spoilers, and if you dislike the sound of the word honor, then you probably should turn this off now, because that word will get used a lot. Because to discuss Klingons and not mention honor is like discussing Patton and not mentioning war. Understanding the Klingon culture requires an understanding of honor. Their central principle is honor. I say understanding because the word honor has come to have numerous meanings to people. It comes across as hypocritical to suggest that honor is important to a culture that will happily cloak their ship to be undetectable and then appear from out of nowhere to ambush weaker targets. We might see that as unsporting, even cowardly. An honorable warrior, we might think, would attack an enemy of equal or even greater strength and on an even footing, rather than using such tactics, and thus exposes the Klingons as talking a good game, but they fail to measure up. This confusion comes because of the interpretation of honor. What is really being thought of in those cases is more like chivalry, the code of the medieval knights that tried to draw together traditional honor code with social mores and moral principles. For a chivalrous knight, Klingon behavior would be barbarism, because it doesn't possess these other elements, added on to rein in the uncouth bullies that these knights would otherwise be, as history had shown. But the fact Klingons are not chivalrous knights, or samurai, or white-hat cowboys who would never shoot a man in the back, does not mean that they don't have honor. They simply have honor that is not connected to the same framework that these other groups do. When one looks at the history of human honor, scholars have suggested that it has taken on two different forms over time. Originally, there was external honor, which itself was represented in two ways. Horizontal honor, the honor that one experiences from amongst one's peers, and vertical honor, that which was for you specifically due to your accomplishments. A code of honor in this case is dictated by the group. You must adhere to these standards. If not, you are without honor and unworthy of inclusion amongst the group. These things still echo with us today. Standards were things like courage for men or chastity for women. Hence why a man who is seen as craven might be told that he has to give up his man card now. Or a woman who is promiscuous would be labeled a slut, which is a sign of rejection for failing to measure up to this code. I'm not defending that, I'm just noting it. Those who are exceptional in such a code are given special respect. A man who lands a particularly daring kill on a mammoth, or wins a fight even when outnumbered, would have his adherence to the code above and beyond what was expected be rewarded with more than just the respect of his peers, but with adoration. Both these types of external honor were important because to lose one's honor was a rejection, and in much of history that could be literal, such as being ejected from a tribe, a death sentence for the most part. Or as civilization marched on, the loss of honor was to be ostracized by honorable members of society and be reduced to a life of poverty and misery. So when one's honor was challenged, you were expected by the code and compelled by self-respect and a desire to thrive to answer that challenge. Hence why two politicians getting into a spat might suddenly find themselves in the middle of a field with pistols ready to shoot each other to ensure their honor remains intact. It may seem silly to us, but to not act and lose face puts your honor at risk. Hence the comment that honor must be satisfied. From this, it's clear to see that honor to the Klingons was of the external kind. Worf's discommendation ceremony doesn't get any more direct as far as horizontal honor goes. For the rejection of the code, in this case treason, Worf himself is rejected. And when Gowron and Duras vied for the top dog position on the High Council, ancient tradition of the Klingons required that they list their many deeds to prove their worth. Vertical honor, the recognition for their outstanding character when it came to honor. And whenever a Klingon's honor is challenged, they are quick to respond and ensure that it is protected. Finally, as I said, traditionally things like courage were what men were expected to have, and women were expected to be chaste. So there was this separation created along gender lines there. It was a boys-only club, much like the way that Gowron describes the High Council, with no place for women, it seems. Now, I said honor was of two forms, so the one that was not external would be, obviously, internal, and is closer to the way that we now think of it. an extremely long development involving things from Christian ideals of universal brotherhood, Greek concepts of universal democracy, the Romantic movement, and a reconsideration of the role of the individual, and the rise of the middle class to challenge traditional noble ideals. This more recent form of honor is not entirely internal. What honor really means today is having a code of right and wrong and adhering to it, being true to one's conscience, while at the same time having respectability for following such a code. This is why hypocrisy is a good way to attack someone you dislike. It suggests that the person is not actually adhering to the rigorous standards they espouse and thus are unworthy of respect. Honor, to our modern ears, tends to mean integrity and fair play, not compromising what we know is right and not having to win by cheating. Worf's is far closer to internal honor, and it's obvious why. He grew up among humans. The Klingon honor code is based upon one's relationship to the group. But since Worf was a group of one, then the entire concept of Klingon honor was not imposed from without, but from within. Thus, he possesses internal honor. That's why he says his honor cannot be taken away by others. No one ever gave it to him. He forged it, and he himself knows that he adheres to it. This difference is why Worf conflicts with the Klingons over matters of honor. Remember that the reason the Council went along with branding Mogh a traitor was that Worf lived outside of the Empire. He was already not possessing of the horizontal honor that existed amongst Klingon warriors, so what would it possibly matter? It was Worf's internal honor that compelled him to act, that said that they may not consider him part of their group, but he possessed honor and he would not let a challenge to it go unanswered. And it also was what allowed him to accept discommendation, because while his people rejected him, his true group, his crewmates, knew that he had acted honorably and continued to respect him. The story Redemption focused much upon Worf recognizing those differences, thanks to Guinan. She approached him in that story to remind him that he's not like other Klingons, and that he needs to recognize this difference in their understanding of honor if he truly wishes to restore his house to greatness. He still would need to act within his own personal code of honor, but he needed to recognize that those others adhered to a different kind of code, and with that knowledge, to deal with them appropriately. When Worf learns Kurn has 4 squadron commanders who are ready to join him in killing Gowron, overthrowing the Council, and replacing it with a new one, Worf rejects this as dishonorable behavior. Gowron is their rightful ruler. But, knowing how the game is now played, that amongst the Klingon honor code there would be no compelling reason to follow a weak leader, Worf can instead instruct Kurn and his followers to do nothing until Gowron is in trouble, and then offer to follow, on the condition of restoring their family name. Worf may be playing politics here, but he is using this to compel Gowron to bestow honor on them for being willing to stand behind him as a leader. They are showing loyalty and thus are deserving of that public recognition. Once his honor is restored to his house and the Klingon Civil War has begun, Picard says that a Starfleet officer cannot participate in another nation's civil war. So Worf, immediately and without hesitation, resigns his commission. Why? Because he had no choice. By Gowron's act, Worf has attained the horizontal honor, the recognition by his peers that he is indeed a man of honor. This is now at odds with his internal honor, because the Klingon code would demand that he join his leader in battle, or at the very least find a way to directly aid the cause. But Picard has made clear that as a Starfleet officer, he was required not to do so. There is, therefore, only one course of action for Worf to take in order to satisfy both forms of honor. He must resign from Starfleet. To not would be to dishonor himself before the Klingons, or aid the Klingons in secret like a Romulan would. So it may seem like he resigns a little too quickly, but that's only because for Worf, there is simply no other way out of this dilemma, no other way in order to preserve his honor. However, that doesn't mean that this conflict was over. After a string of defeats, a warrior challenged Gowron's leadership. So Gowron stopped everything and got into a knife fight with the other man, upsetting Worf that Gowron was putting his pride before the good of the Empire. The problem was that, to the Klingons, Worf was looking at it all wrong. External honor codes worked by creating an odd balance of selflessness and self-interest. Each person strove for honor because it benefited himself, yet a group all possessing this code, all adhering to the standards of honor, gave the entire group that standing. If anyone within it lacked honor, they compromised the standing of that group. How can they be honorable if they allow someone who behaves so dishonorably to be among them? And thus, standing was far more than ego. It was survival. If your clan was seen as being weak, then another clan might decide they would take what you have. Your lack of honor has now put everyone else at risk. Thus, if you are challenged, not responding to it not only makes you look weak, it makes the entire group look weak. And remember, the reason that Kurn wanted to kill Gowron was because he perceived him as too weak of a man. It may seem all wrong for Gowron to stop everything and get into a knife fight, but within this culture, this behavior was not only tolerated, it was demanded. In one episode of Deep Space Nine, Quark was challenged to a duel with bat'leths, and he instead threw it down and invited death. You might think such a thing would draw contempt, unable to even attempt a defense of his own life. Yet Gowron and the others saw that differently. Quark's bravery in the face of certain death showed that he might not be strong in arms, but he was not weak in his will, and that he went up to the jaws of death and invited them to close around him. He was in no way a warrior, and he wasn't one of them. But in this way, he behaved in a manner worthy of Klingon respect. A true Klingon would have recognized this, as indeed everyone in this room did but his attacker. They would have offered to spare Quark his life if he would but withdraw the accusation made against them. All the attacker needed was to have the challenge to his or her honor answered and proven baseless, and the honor code would have been satisfied by that. Instead, Quark's would-be killer attempted to strike him down gleefully, which to everyone else only confirmed that the accusations Quark had made were true, that this man was not seeking to protect his honor, he was trying to cover up his crimes. Thus, they recognized that Quark was deserving of honor, and that his attacker was deserving of none. This idea, though, of fighting against every challenge is something that Worf struggles with. He puts the group first, as honor should require, and thus sees pride as something that should be ignored when necessary. But as he said, you can't regain honor by acting dishonorably. In the same way, a Klingon would argue that one can't fight for honor if one has been dishonored by another. Pride may be part of it, but within the honor code, not answering a challenge isn't restraint. It's cowardice, a dishonorable weakness that cannot be abided. Quark was honored even though he chose not to fight, because he answered the challenge and faced death with courage. No one would want to fight alongside such a man, but he showed a heart that is still to be admired. But that is not to say Quark is more Klingon than Worf is, of course. Over the course of his time in service to the Empire, Worf sees that there are aspects of it that he no longer agrees with. When Worf was offered the life of the son of Duras, he spared the boy. If the kid was to be executed as a traitor, that would have been one thing. But this is clearly not that. It's allowing Worf to have revenge, and as he notes, he himself doesn't need to avenge himself on this child. It was his father that wronged Worf, and Worf has already made him pay for that. So Worf spares the kid, and his remark again shows the difference between internal and external honor. As Kurn says that killing him is their way, but Worf insists that it's not his way, that one can define one's own sense of honor. And that is the struggle of Worf, to cope with both his own sense of honor and the code of the Klingons.